I have the pleasure of being the odd one out in this, on these sessions because I'm not talking about emergency management. I'm talking about prevention. Why? Because that's what the Netherlands is good at. We are the masters of prevention of flooding. And I'll show you why. And you'll see an awful lot of pictures of beautiful projects, great infrastructure. But that's not the lesson I want you to take with you. The lesson that I want you to take with you from my talk is more about culture. It's about living with water. This is the Netherlands, at least this is Rotterdam. The Netherlands, for those who've never been there, shame. We are with 17 million people in a country more or less a little bit bigger than the state of Maryland. We are quite industrious. We are one of the top 20 global economies. We have the biggest port outside of China. We have a huge airport. If you ever fly in Europe, big chance that you flew through Amsterdam. And we have an awful lot of rivers, like you can see on the picture. We have 4 European rivers that all flow through our country. And that actually becomes a little bit of a problem because 60% of our country is prone to flooding. 30% of our country is actually below sea level. Because what we did in the past, we started to live in a swamp. And when we found out that we need more land, we actually reclaimed land. So 60% is prone to flooding, and you probably guessed it. That's the part where most people live. That's the part where most of our economy is situated. Through this, and actually as you can see on the pictures, we have been reclaiming land since the 14th century. So we have some experience in water management. And actually that's not always a success. It's trial and error. Every 6 or 50 years we would have a flood here and there. And actually that ended with the big one, as we call it, or the flood in 1953. 1,800 people died. Economic damages were enormous. And this is 1953, and the Netherlands said no more. We are not going to give way to the water anymore. And so we started something that was pretty well known in the engineering world. It's called the Delta Works, a complete system of dikes and storm surge barriers that basically shorten our coastline and strengthen it. This is actually a fortress against the sea. And actually, if I talk to Americans about how we live with water, how we see water, I always make the comparison that we talk about water as people in DC talk about national security. Because this is, for us, this is national security. So we started this project, the Delta Works, in the 50s, after the big disaster, under the creed, no more. And we actually made this this was actually like a bit comparable to the Apollo project. This was our moonshot. You guys wanted to go to the moon. We wanted to make sure we would never flood. And it was a long-term project. Actually, this is the Maasland barrier. This is the last project we finished. It finished in the 90s. So you would think that after this one, we felt pretty happy. We were safe. Well, not actually, because we already realized that when we finished this project, we have a whole new set of challenges. Why? We had riverine floods. So we're safe from the sea, and then you have a riverine flood. This is not sustainable transportation. We get more and more intense rainfalls in urban cities, but also in our rural parts. We actually have droughts. This is the same river that caused the server to use the A2 highway. This river now was basically dry during the summer of 2008. This is new for us. We're the country that keeps the water out, not the country that keeps the water in. So for us, you know, climate change is clear and present. It's not some boogeyman that will maybe show up in 10 years. No, we're actually feeling it right now. And we have to prepare our country for this. But there's a lot of uncertainty, like how much will the sea level rise? Do we get like more discharge in the rivers or less? What are the temperatures look like? And we actually created, after the Delta Works, now what we call the Delta Program. The Delta Program is not a policy, it's a framework. It's a framework for us to deal with uncertainty that comes with climate change. We know it's coming, and we have a kind of a feeling how it's going to look like, but we're not sure. So dealing with uncertainty, that's the policy. And actually in that policy, we have made provisions for money flows. We actually changed our law, so we know that in the case of an emergency, who's doing what. And we also put like a creed in it. And that's 3 words. And actually I want you to remember those 3 words because I think that's a valuable lesson for our American counterparts. The first concept is flexibility. Be flexible, know how to deal with uncertainty, but also be, flexible. This might be your authority, this might be your job, but you might be a little bit flexible about it. It's also about sustainability. Not so much, of course, it's sustainable as ecological friendly, but also economical. Whatever we do, it has to have a good business case. It has to be used for more than just flood prevention. And then it's a very European word, as an American colleague said, the word is solidarity. We're in it with the whole group. It's not like you on your own and me on your own. No, we really have to work together to pull this one off. And we're actually adapting those principles in projects like this one, which is a new coastal protection system. We had to enforce our coast. We could choose for just a big seawall because that's actually what the engineers calculated. The problem is that would destroy the local economy, who's dependent on tourism from the beach. So instead of building the wall, we just started to do a beach enlargement to reduce wave energy, and we actually splurged a little bit on design. We pooled resources and we actually made a project. Most people who now visit Scheveningen don't know that they're actually walking on a coastal defense structure. They just think that we just beautified the boulevard. Same here at the river. We actually had to create more capacity for the river to prevent flooding. Instead of building higher levees, we made room for the river, which is actually a program of us. We created a bypass so that the river can flood in times of high discharges, and that we actually designed that bypass as a park. So actually the city now has a park where people can enjoy the water, they can swim because they couldn't swim in the river because there's too much traffic. And all of a sudden they have this amazing opportunity for suburban development. We also start to accept that we will have some nuisance flooding. For example, this is the city of Rotterdam that's basically refurbishing their public space so certain spots can actually flood and retain water. This is a beautiful art garden, and in times of heavy rain, it's a water storage center. And we don't only fight nature, we actually have to work with nature. And here, this is an example, it's called the sand engine. We actually use the rivers, the tides and the winds to disperse sand. Instead of doing all these beach nourishment along our sandy coast, we now put one big beach nourishment in place and let nature do the rest. This whole new method and uncertainty also means that we have to reimagine the engagement with our citizens. Our citizens are used to being safe. They literally tell you, we pay taxes, you do your job, we're the best in flood management, right? So nothing to worry about it. We now have to make sure that these people are aware of the fact that we might not be able to protect them from everything that's going to happen in the next 20, 30, 50 years. For example, we have these apps. It's called Will I Flood? You put in your zip code and we actually give people advice that, it could happen. For example, there's a 10% this will happen in your lifetime. You will flood. How bad will it be? In this case, it will be like 2 feet. What does it mean? So basically we give people not just an insight into what's their risk, but also if it's going to happen, what should they do? And this actually is already sparking discussion within our citizens. We don't do this just in the Netherlands. We also reach out to American colleagues. Why? Because we feel that the storms you're experiencing are much worse than what we experience. So whatever we think of, if it works in your cities, it will probably work with ours as well. This is, for example, Charleston. I've been in Charleston a couple of weeks ago. We do workshops with them, and we're actually preparing a plan to make Charleston safer. And actually, they are already honing in on the whole solidarity process. They really pushed us to engage with all communities who are present in the Charleston area. Norfolk is another partner of ours. Norfolk actually realized that they are in high risk for flooding, and they asked us not to just think with them about how can we prevent flooding, but also how can we actually use the investments that we want to do in resilience to create a better quality of life in our city. How can we adjust our infrastructure? How can we create a better functional city center? And then there's New York after Sandy. We had a very close partnership after that. We actually sent some of our top senior executives to New York to run the Rebuild by Design competition. A lot of companies and institutes from the Netherlands were involved in the rebuild efforts, designing a better, newer New York. And what we actually learned from New York and our engagement there was the whole outreach. The way you in the US can actually mobilize all these civic communities was unheard of for us. And we actually learned from that an awful lot. And then there is actually Louisiana. The city of New Orleans and the state of Louisiana are our oldest partner in the US. And what you see is actually that they are now, after more than a decade of communication, they really have developed their own resilience culture. The concepts that we use that make our water culture so unique, flexibility, sustainability, and solidarity, they actually took that and gave it their own spin. So if you look at their coastal program, it definitely has Dutch DNA, but it certainly has a Louisiana flavor. So the best of both worlds, right? So, and actually we're very proud on this collaboration with our US partners. Why? Because, like I said, we are very much aware that we are facing a whole new set of challenges. And we're pretty sure that we can actually engineer an awful lot of the stuff, and we can actually design beautiful landscapes. I mean, we're showing it off right here in the US, and you will all love it. But we're also very curious about what we can learn from you guys. I just mentioned the fact that you have hurricanes, which are much more stronger than we will never get a category 5. It's never going to happen. But if we can develop things that work for you guys, it will work for us. And also, and this is, we're here with the emergency management associations. We are so good in prevention that we never thought about actually managing something if something happens. And we really want to learn from you guys, because we have to make the trip from prevention to adaptation to emergency management. From my experience, you guys are actually walking the other way. You come from handling crises, and you're now trying to more focus on management. And actually that's, from a Dutch perspective, a great strategy. Do you like, if you do an investment and return of investment of $7 for each dollar? No, I will take it anyway. I will take it to the bank. But that's actually the return on investment the Army Corps gets, more or less, on all their safety, on their levies. So, prevention is always better than handling a crisis. And actually you, as emergency management community, have a large role in that, because you know what can go wrong. So you are actually one of the front runners in creating a community of resilience, not just from managing a disaster, but actually trying to reduce the risk and actually enjoy the fact that you live in an area that might have risks, because that's what we do. This is a picture that's really the Netherlands. This is water for me. This is actually a maritime museum, and that's actually a reproduction of a 17th century trade ship. So for the Netherlands, water is in our culture. It has been, we're a trading nation. We've been sailing the seas forever. It's the source of our wealth. But it's also something that's really personal for us. We like to enjoy the water. We like to swim in it. We like to sit next to it. We like to sail. But it's also, and we're very aware, it's also a risk. So these people are enjoying the water. And that's actually what we think the best way to enjoy. Enjoy the water, but be very much aware of the risks. And in the US, you have an enormous country with very different cultures. If you go from Boston to Florida, or from Florida to Texas, you have all these communities, and everybody has their own relationship with water. And we think that we need to use that relationship with water as a base for handling flood risks. Not just from a emergency perspective, but also from as an opportunity. I mean, everybody wants to be on the water. Try to buy real estate at the water. You know, that's prime real estate. It's also a prime risk. And if you can handle that, that's fine. But you have to handle it. If not now, otherwise you'll have the folks from FEMA at your door or in your boat at the next hurricane. That's more or less my story. And I hope that you wrote 3 words down: flexibility, sustainability, and solidarity. Hang it above your bed or in your desk and talk about colleagues like how can we use these words, these concepts, as a framework to look at all the projects we're involved. Where can we be more flexible to, make projects feasible? Where can we actually make investments in flood preparation enjoyable, not during the flood, but for the entire time we don't use it? And how can we actually break the silo? How can we really make a community feel to work with this? Because this is not something that you are going to solve. This is not something the real estate people are going to solve. This is not something that the insurance industry is going to solve. Now, this is actually going to be a team effort. That's my talk for today. Well, that's always the problem, money. And I think that an awful lot of these projects that we consider really successful, they didn't start with the budget. Talking about the budget, that's easy. We don't have a budget, so there's no project. I recently was with a couple of people from FEMA in the Netherlands, and one of the project managers told me, we don't talk about budget, we talk about values. What do you think is important? What do you think, what is the value you want to create? So we're looking at, what is it worth instead of what do we have? And that actually starts a whole, if you turn the discussion upside down, and then you start working your way through, okay, this is what it's worth, this is what we value at it. Then you can talk about budget. For example, the project in Scheveningen, we didn't have a budget to do a whole swanky boulevard. We had a budget to build a wall. But we discussed, okay, we find that it's not the right value. So we said, okay, what do we want? And then you start looking for ways to leverage the funds, because then there's an investment opportunity. And that's my idea, and that's actually what I see in the US as being successful. Talk about a value proposition first, and not about talk about what you want and not what you can or can't. What we always say to the US or to Asian partners or European partners, don't copy us. We are a unique country with a unique assets and values. And that's why I didn't want to talk with you guys about or engineering or finance. That's something that's, that's for us. I mean, you have your own engineers, you have your own system. I wanted to talk about these values like flexibility, sustainability, and solidarity, because you can't copy us. You are a different country, you are a different world, and you have to find your way in your own system. For a part, it's historic. In the Netherlands, we always say that the culture in the Netherlands, which is really all focused on compromise and not so much about leadership, is because of the water. Because we always had to cooperate in keeping our feet dry, keeping the levees in place. Nobody could really be in charge because you always needed your neighbors to work with you. So yeah, that's for a part, that's really cultural. On the other hand, if I look to, for example, the engagement we have in Charleston right now, that's also solidarity. Actually, the city, and this actually started with people from the emergency management community, they actually said, okay, we really have to engage all the type of communities within our city to be on board, because this is actually going to really impact the future of our cities. And that's actually some of the assets the US have. You have these civic groups. You know, if something happens, you have all these civic groups that mobilize themselves. And I think you have to find a way to mobilize all that energy around this point in certain communities. The discussion might be much less urgent in Nebraska than it is in the lowlands of the Carolinas. And the same along the coast. The discussion in Boston has a whole new, different dynamic than in Florida. So it's really, you know, a local culture. You really have to find your way. But yeah, for us, you know, the whole solidarity process, for example, you guys have insurance. My next speaker will talk about insurance. We don't have insurance. We just have the feeling like we are actually investing in this. People pay for it, and we have to do it as a group. And by the way, it's actually not feasible as well, because we actually had insurance before the flood of '53. After the flood of '53, people realized that if we insure everybody, the insurance industry would be bankrupt. So it's also a matter of a necessity. We have to do this together because there's not an insurance premium, you know, insurance firm that's going to bail us out.